Hey, right, I'm sort of making this video in a response to a request from Jeff from Jeff Buys Cars. He rang me on Friday to tell me about an ongoing campaign that he obviously feels very passionate about. And I know he put a video on Friday evening sort of briefly detailing it. Now, he went into a lot more detail with me. From what I can gather, there are some very intelligent and influential people behind this campaign. And as much as I don't really know how effective it might be or whether it'll be effective at all, we can't just stand around kicking our heels hoping that, things get better in this country. We need to do something. And I'm happy to put my weight behind this campaign if there is the remotest possibility that it might make some difference. So hang on to the end of the video for information on that campaign and how you can help if you want to. I think it was about 2 years ago now that I first coined the phrase in a video that there was a war against, the motorist. Me and you, the car driver, the motorcyclist. Now at that time, some people agreed with that sort of terminology, others branded me a conspiracy theorist. Yet I see now that expression, the war on the motorist, is being used in all sorts of mainstream media. It's regularly in the headlines of newspapers, and it's regularly in the headlines of what are sort of mainstream social media news sources. Now, granted, it's not just our freedom to travel that is being affected by, various governmental policies, not just in the UK, but around the world. But in my videos, I need to stick within the remit of this being a motoring or motorcycle lifestyle channel, so I tend to stick to the subjects that affect our ability to travel around. The ULEZ zones and low traffic neighbourhoods have been grabbing a lot of the main news these days. Of course, the ULEZ zone's been branded as a tax on our ability to travel, on top of all the other taxes that we pay for fuel and road tax. Unless you drive an electric vehicle that, they're rather expensive, they will get you from A to B as long as A and B are not too far apart. The government, in so many different ways, is forcing us to give up the internal combustion engine and adopt electric vehicles. They're using a lot of different nasty tactics to make us do this. For example, from next year, they're limiting the amount of petrol cars that can be sold by each manufacturer in order to force people to buy electric cars because it's problematic buying a petrol or diesel car. And even though the experts tell us, if we believe what they're telling us, that even if every country on this planet stopped using coal, gas and oil products tomorrow, it would take something like 200 to 1,000 years for any discernible effects to take place on our climate, our government is still hell-bent in pushing us into electric vehicles in the shortest possible time. More or less by force. Now, last year, a few motorcar manufacturers blew the whistle on the fact that these vehicles are far from zero emissions. The UK government website brands that as a conspiracy theory. But a recent study released by the Manhattan Institute, and I'll leave a link to this paper in the video description down below. It's a long document, but it is a real eye-opener. I should have felt vindicated when I read it, but to be quite honest, I was just appalled. This study, which they've basically taken every bit of research, every bit of modelling, every claim, every fact, every figure relating to the manufacture of electric vehicles, that's battery-powered electric vehicles, they've pulled it apart and they've re-examined it, and they're telling us now that those facts, figures and predictions, not just given to us by the government, but also given to us by the motor manufacturers, are ludicrously inaccurate. Now, the way I interpret it, this is not the words used in this report, but the way I interpret it is that electric vehicles are an environmental ticking time bomb. They've identified numerous errors in the modelling used to sort of certify these vehicles as being low emissions. Modelling that was enacted basically, in a lot of respects, through guesswork and a failure to grasp the difficulties and the environmental damage that is involved in obtaining the rare earth materials used for BEV battery manufacture. As they say, these are called rare earth materials for a reason, and the more that we dig them up, the rarer they will become. So as time goes on, more material will have to be extracted per car than the current modelling presumes. This will increase environmental damage and it will push up CO2 emissions in the manufacture of these vehicles. They also state that the lifetime's emissions calculations that have been made by the pro-EV lobby don't take into account the type of charging that EV drivers are often forced to adopt, fast charging on the road, which destroys the batteries much faster than slow overnight charging. The modelling also fails to take into account the difference between long-range EVs and short-range EVs. And this is something that I've covered in previous videos. The longevity of batteries are grossly overestimated, which has skewed the figures for lifetime emissions of these vehicles. What the Manhattan Institute says is that it's very probable that electric vehicles are going to have a larger lifetime carbon footprint than their equivalent petrol or diesel vehicle. Now, this report contains a lot more eye-opening information than just that. I mean, seriously, if you're at all interested in this sort of information at all, read that report. Electric vehicles will not lower CO2 emissions, they may even increase it. Although I'm sure those proponents of net zero will find ways to discredit this in some way. It's still worth a read. Now, another thing that I wanted to briefly bring to your attention, and I'll put a link up, I think, probably to the Telegraph. It depends whether I can get access to it, because if you read their articles too many times during the course of a month, they effectively block you unless you pay. But I will find one newspaper article that sort of reports on it, and that is that your insurance is about to go by about 25%. That is your motor insurance, according to a spokesman from the motor insurance industry. And the reason is electric cars. Now, just to be clear, your insurance is going to go up whether you have an electric car or not, because, there are certain problems with electric cars, problems that I've not touched upon in the past, because I was very uncertain of the figures that were available to view in my research. Now, many sources lead us to believe that electric vehicles have a nasty habit of bursting into flames. We've seen a lot of examples, footage and photographs of this happening. In fact, just last year, I went to my local supermarket and there was an area of the car park cordoned off. And within that cordon were 3 burnt-out vehicles. The middle one being an electric vehicle that had decided to spontaneously combust while its owner was inside getting a bottle of milk or whatever. Now, I don't think it was a brand new electric vehicle. It was difficult to tell, actually, because it was just a burnt-out shell. I would say probably 3, 4, maybe 5 years old. But the problem was it was parked in proximity to 2 other cars. So the car either side of it was also torched. Both were very definitely write-offs. The intensity of the flames also set the actual tarmac on fire, and the supermarket also had to pay out tens of thousands of pounds to have the actual car park repaired. Imagine the devastation that would have caused if it had been in an enclosed car park. Now, at that time, I did a little bit of research to see what the figures were regarding electric vehicle fires in this country, and There's virtually no information, no official information to be found anywhere, almost as though it never happens. But it must be happening because, and you couldn't make this up really, the government has just issued some guidelines for motor repairers and recovery companies as to how to treat electric vehicles that have been involved in an accident. Now, here's what I gleaned from this report. In any situation where it's likely that the battery cells may have been damaged in the collision, the following precautions have to be followed. The vehicle can't be recovered unless the emergency services are in attendance, and I take it by that the main fire brigade, just in case the car bursts into flames during the recovery. The car will have to be recovered on a flatbed truck because towing them generates high voltages and that could set the batteries off. So straight away you're putting enormous pressures on the emergency services. I think back in 2018 there were 160,000 collisions in the UK alone. And it's going to bump up the cost of recovery because only a certain type of vehicle can be used. But it doesn't end there, because once that car has reached the repair centre, it has to be quarantined for 48 hours, at least 15 yards away from any other vehicle or building. How many repair centres do you know that have the facility to do that? This is going to be enormously expensive. It's going to push up the cost of repairs, and the insurance claims, which are going to be astronomical, are going to be loaded onto everybody's insurance premium, because that's how the insurance industry works. Now, I don't know about you, but I find myself getting more and more angry about electric vehicles. For a start, if these were any other type of car with these sort of serious safety flaws, they wouldn't be allowed on the road. I mean, over the last 20 years or so, I've seen several instances of petrol or diesel vehicles that had an inherent fault which left them prone to bursting into flames during an accident. Those vehicles were immediately recalled. In fact, my Triumph T120 was subject of a very similar recall for dangerous faulty wiring. And those vehicles weren't allowed back onto the public roads until the fault had been corrected. Yet because these are electric vehicles which are supposedly saving the planet, although no, not really, these faults are okay, they're allowed. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I know what's right and I know what's wrong. And electric vehicles in the current state are wrong. And I, for one, am sick of the knowledge that my hard-earned money, whether it be through fuel duty, VAT, income tax, road tax, or my insurance premiums, are subsidising wealthy, self-entitled, virtue-signalling motorists that want to enjoy cheap per-mile travel at everyone else's expense. They're not paying the way, they're just adding on to everyone else's financial burden. Now, I believe in reality the bubble burst on electric cars last year. The rot started to set in. The evidence started to emerge that these were not the planet saviour that politicians are making them out to be. As it stands at the moment, it appears that they're going to be an environmental disaster. They're not going to be particularly good transport. Current trends in servicing charges show that they're actually going to be more expensive to maintain than a conventional ICE car. And that is in no small part due to the health and safety executive having to issue special measures on how these vehicles should be treated whilst in for servicing, even for valeting. They present a very clear danger to the people that own them, not just the people that own them, but anyone that happens to be around their cars when something goes wrong. They don't hold the value, and currently our government is hemorrhaging tax revenue in an effort to keep this electric vehicle dream alive. Despite the mounting evidence that they're taking the wrong path with this mode of transport, they are just doubling down and trying to push it harder and faster. Which brings me on to this campaign with Jeff Buys Cars. Electric vehicles are just one aspect of government policies that are affecting our lives, not for the better, but for the worse. They're not in the public interest. And for the most part, the government had no public mandate to follow these policies. In the video description, you will find a link to a campaign called I Will Not Comply. The government governs this country by public consent. And the premise behind this campaign is that you can write a letter to your MP, or even to the Prime Minister if you like, revoking your consent. I'm not going to talk about it any more than that. It will be the first link in the video description down below. Have a look at it for yourself and decide whether it's something that you want to get involved in. There's nothing illegal or subversive about it. I wouldn't have brought it to your attention if there was, but maybe it's a campaign that will make a difference. Now, if you're watching the end of this video, thank you so much for indulging me. I am, of course, going to be back on Friday, so if you're riding, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.